Hey guys, TechGeekHD here again with another video, and today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my thoughts on the M1 Mac Mini. This is actually the first desktop Apple computer that I've ever purchased for myself. I've used iMacs and stuff when I was in school and high school, and then I of course had my personal MacBook Pro. My first ever Mac, I think, was the original MacBook Air, and then I've been through several MacBook Pros, but this is my first desktop experience with an Apple computer, and I think it's interesting because it is not probably the most iconic Mac that ever existed, but it is one that I think has been the most accessible to a lot of people. I remember a couple years ago, earlier in my YouTube career, I would see a lot of people who wanted to get into the Mac ecosystem sort of referring each other to the Mac Mini, and while I never really gave it a second look, I think ever since the M1 proposition came out, this became a more and more interesting idea to me. So for those of you who know, and those of you who have watched, for example, my desk tour video, you'll know that I use my Apple Pro Display XDR as my primary display, and I always have my MacBook Pro connected to it via the USB-C port, and so I used it as a desktop most of the time anyway. And so the proposition came up when I saw that Apple released the M1 chip, which is their own in-house designed and manufactured silicon, and I saw all these videos on YouTube about how well it performed. And so what I really wanted to do was just kind of give it a shot and see if I could make this my personal primary computer. Now, the interesting thing is that I actually have a MacBook Pro as my work computer, and as a product designer, I know for a fact that pretty much any company that I ever go to will almost always supply me with a MacBook Pro of some sort or another, because it seems like the industry standard for the work that I do. And so given that I will always sort of have a MacBook Pro available to me if I ever need a more powerful portable computer, and the fact that I also have a 2018 iPad Pro and Apple Pencil, it meant that sort of my mobile productivity and power setups were kind of covered, and I really wanted a more dedicated desktop computer. And of course the M1 really seemed like an exciting proposition because of how powerful all these reviewers claimed that the computer was, and what a good value it was. And so what I did was I went through the Apple trade-in program, and I traded in my 15-inch 2018 MacBook Pro that was spec'd out with everything other than the i9. It was an i7, it had the upgraded SSD, it had maxed out RAM, and Apple gave me about $1,100–$1,200 for it, with their Phobio partner doing and handling all of the shipping and stuff like that. So I sent it in, they sent me a gift card, and I ordered a maxed out 2020 or 2021, whatever it is, Mac Mini M1 with the maxed out RAM, which I unfortunately, it looked like it was capped to only 16 gigs, so that's what I was able to get. I got the upgraded, I believe 1 or 2 terabyte SSD. And of course the M1 chip, and it's been performing pretty stellar. I actually really like this computer. I think probably the thing that I like most about it is just how quick it is. It runs Big Sur super well, as thin and light, which isn't really necessarily a big deal for a desktop computer, but it's nice that it's just this tiny little package that's really easy to keep on my desk, and it actually still looks great. I think it's actually really nice, and for someone like me who likes to have a really minimal and sort of well-sorted desk setup and workspace, I think it complements the setup pretty well. Of course, the Rosetta translation layer to be able to run x86 applications is actually pretty good. It's much better than, for example, the solution that Microsoft offers on their ARM computer. I believe it's called the Surface Pro X. And of course, full disclosure, I actually do work at Microsoft. I just don't work in that organization or on that computer. But in the quest of being entirely objective, I have to say that I think the Rosetta layer on Apple's computers does it much better. It runs it really fast. Applications like Adobe Lightroom and Lightroom CC, which are things that I use on a consistent daily basis for my workflows, work excellently, if not the same as they did on the MacBook Pro. As those applications become or are translated to work primarily on M1, and the developers like Adobe actually work to sort of build them from the ground up for the M1 chip, I anticipate performance being even better than it is today. Today I believe it's pretty comparable to what it was on my MacBook Pro with the i7 and the 16 gigs of RAM, but I imagine that what I've seen with performance on applications that are built for M1, such as Final Cut Pro, which I'm using to edit this video, I'm excited to see sort of the opportunities that are presented with all of those applications and those developers really being able to use the M1 to its full potential. So either way, I mean, basically I've just been really happy with this computer. I think that the M1 is a really interesting development from Apple, and I think that it makes a lot of logical sense for them to be able to fully integrate their production and their development of the computers to have their in-house silicon. I know that Intel, of course, in the PR space has been sort of trying to fight back since Apple is such a valuable client of theirs, and they sort of need to really make sure that they're selling computers that use Intel chips on the other side of the market to sort of make up for the loss of this client, which, even though the client hasn't fully left, because of course Apple still sells Intel computers, Intel and other silicon manufacturers can of course see behemoths like Apple putting together their silicon teams to produce chips like this that work so efficiently as far as power consumption is concerned and performance is concerned that of course it looks like a threat, and justifiably so. I think that, you know, Intel and AMD and other companies that have been making x86 chips really need to sort of buck up essentially and say, hey, like, there's competition out there in the world today, and it's going to either lead us to build a better product or we're going to be left out of the market in the future of computing. But either way, guys, that's about it. That's been my thoughts on the M1 Mac Mini. I really like my computer, and I think I'm going to keep it and enjoy it for the next couple of years as my desktop computer. It can run my Pro Display XDR flawlessly, which is sort of was my main concern, to make sure that the integrated graphics on M1 were able to push the pixels, and I believe that I can actually push to at least two of them at their full 6K native resolution on each monitor themselves. So I may even think about picking up a second Pro Display XDR to really sort of maximize the screen real estate available to me, and just really help with my personal productivity and things like that. Either way, that's been about it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.